The red brick bistro buzzed like a beehive at the peak of summer. It was a Friday night, and every table was full. The air was thick with the smell of garlic butter, seared steak, and the sweet promise of dessert. Underneath it all was a constant soundtrack, the clink of wine glasses meeting in a toast, the low rumble of a dozen conversations tangled together, the sharp call of order up from the kitchen pass, and the steady swoosh of the swinging doors that led to the steam and chaos behind-the-scenes dot in the middle of it all. She moved. She was a waitress, and her name was Elena, to the customers. She was a pleasant face, efficient pair of hands, a flash of a smile, a nod, a quick, "I'll get that for you right away." She wore the standard uniform simple black dress, a neat apron tied at her waist, and comfortable black shoes that had learned every inch of the worn wooden floor. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical, no-nonsense ponytail. Her hands were always busy. One minute they were balancing a heavy tray of dinner plates, her fingers carefully navigating the hot rims. The next, they were deftly arranging clean silverware into rolled napkins, a task she could do almost without looking. They presented menus, poured water without spilling a drop, and cleared away the messy remains of a meal crumbs, smears of sauce, coffee rings. She was good at her job. She remembered who wanted extra dressing on the side and who was allergic to shellfish. She could sense when a table needed another minute to decide, and when they were quietly hoping to catch her eye for the check. It was a dance of attention and anticipation, and she knew the steps well. But if you watched her closely, and almost no one did, you might have noticed a small, private habit. Over in the corner of the dining room, taking up a good bit of space, was the restaurant's baby grand piano. It was a beautiful thing, all dark, polished wood that gleamed under the warm glow of the overhead lights. A small, elegant brass plaque on the side said it was from the early 1900s. To most people here, it was just a piece of decoration, a fancy thing that made the place look classy. It had never been played, not in all the months Elena had worked there. The piano had a lid that was always closed, locked shut. On top of it, the manager had placed a tall, slender vase with fake flowers and a flickering electric candle. It was, for all purposes, a very expensive table. Elena's path through the restaurant often took her past it. When she was carrying a loaded tray of dirty dishes back to the kitchen, her route would skirt the piano's curve. And sometimes, just for a second, as she passed, her free hand, the one not holding the tray, would reach out. Her fingers, which might be sticky from clearing a syrup-soaked plate, would gently brush against the cool, smooth surface of the piano's lid. It was the lightest touch, over in a heartbeat. Not a stroke of longing, exactly. More like a check-in. A silent, "Hello, still here." Then she'd be gone, pushing through the swinging doors into the noisy, hot kitchen. The kitchen was another world. Here, the sounds were sharper, more urgent. The head chef, a large man with a permanent frown of concentration, barked orders. Sizzling pans hissed on the giant stove. The dishwasher roared in its corner. Elena would deposit her dirty dishes, call out for the next order, and collect hot plates. Her hands now careful of a different kind of heat. Table 9 needs their steaks. Medium rare and well done. Let's go. The chef would yell, and Elena would nod, already moving. She worked alongside 2 other servers. There was an older woman who had been at the bistro for years and knew all the gossip, and a young guy, still in college, who was fast but always a little distracted. They were a team, but a busy one, with little time for chatter beyond, "Can you grab table 5's drinks?" or "I need a dessert menu at 12. The college kid, her friend, sometimes caught her looking at the piano. Once, during a rare slow moment, he nudged her. "You know how to play that thing or something?" Elena had just shrugged, wiping down the counter. "A little. A long time ago." "Cool," he said, already losing interest, his eyes on his phone. It had been a long time ago. Back in her old bedroom, in her parents' house, there had been a different piano. An upright, not a grand. It was scuffed and a little out of tune, but she had loved it. From the age of 10 until she turned 18, her life had a strict rhythm: school, homework, practice. Her teacher, a stern but kind older woman, had drilled scales and arpeggios into her. She had played Bach inventions until her fingers ached, and learned sad, beautiful pieces by Chopin that made her teenage heart feel deep and important. Her parents weren't rich. The piano lessons were a sacrifice, one her mother made clear. "This is an opportunity," she would say, her hands rough from her own work. "Music is a gift. Don't waste it." Elena didn't waste it. She practiced for hours, the metronome ticking like a faithful insect on top of the piano. She dreamed of maybe, one day, playing in a small hall somewhere, or even just teaching others. The piano was her secret world, a place where the complicated feelings of growing up could find a shape and sound. Then, life happened. Her father got sick. The medical bills piled up. The dream of any kind of music school evaporated like steam. She finished high school and started working first at a diner, then at a department store, and finally here at the nicer red brick bistro where the tips were better. The upright piano at home was eventually sold to make space and to help pay a bill. It was the practical thing to do. She hadn't played in 7 years. Not a single note. The calluses on her fingertips from the strings had softened and disappeared, replaced by the tougher skin of a worker's hands. The music, she thought, was probably gone too, faded away like an old photograph. It was a chapter from a different life. Yet, in the quietest moments, it would sneak back. When she was alone in her small apartment, exhausted after a double shift, humming to herself while she made a simple dinner, the tunes that came out weren't the pop songs on the radio. They were fragments of those old, complex pieces. A cascade of notes from a Mozart sonata. The mournful melody line from a piece by Debussy. It was muscle memory for her voice. Her fingers, while rolling those endless bundles of napkins and silverware, would sometimes twitch against her palm, pressing invisible keys in a silent, forgotten pattern. Back in the bistro on this busy Friday, the dinner rush was hitting its peak. A large party was celebrating a birthday in the corner, their laughter louder than everyone else's. Elena weaved between tables, her mind fully on the job. 2 more coffees for table 3. The cheesecake for table 7 needs to go out. Table 10 is waiting for their bill. She passed the piano again. This time, as her fingers trailed across the lid, she didn't just feel the cool wood. She imagined, just for a fleeting second, what it would feel like to lift that heavy lid, to see the row of perfect white and black keys waiting underneath, to press one down and hear it sound, deep and ringing. In the middle of all this dinner noise, she shook the thought away immediately. It was a silly fantasy. This wasn't her piano. This was her job. Her hands were for carrying, clearing, and pouring. They weren't for making music anymore. She picked up a heavy tray of empty plates, the weight familiar and solid in her hands. As she turned towards the kitchen, the noise of the restaurant swelling around her, the grand piano sat silent in its corner. A beautiful, useless thing. And she walked away from it, back to her real work. The birthday party in the corner was getting louder. They were a group of 10, all dressed in the kind of clothes that said they'd come from offices downtown. They'd been there for over 2 hours, ordering bottle after bottle of wine. The man at the head of the table, the one with the birthday, had a loud, confident laugh that cut through the other noises in the room. His face was flushed, and he kept clapping people on the back. Elena was clearing the table next to them, carefully stacking dirty dishes onto her tray. She could feel the vibration of their laughter through the floor. She kept her smile polite and neutral, the one she used for tables that were a little too boisterous. She was focused on not spilling a half-full glass of red wine when the man's voice rose above the rest. He wasn't talking to his table anymore. He was talking to the room. I mean, just look at it. He boomed, waving a hand toward the corner. A gorgeous piece like that. A real shame. Elena followed his gesture. He was looking right at the piano. A few people at nearby tables glanced over, then went back to their meals. It's just for show, the man continued, leaning back in his chair. Probably doesn't even work. Probably full of dust and dead spiders. His friends chuckled. What's the point? You get a fancy piano to play it. Might as well have a painting of a piano. Same thing. He took a big sip of his wine. Elena tightened her grip on the tray. Something hot and defensive flashed in her chest, quick and surprising. It wasn't her piano. She didn't own it. But his words felt like someone throwing mud at something beautiful and quiet. The manager, a man in his 40s named David, who usually stayed near the host's stand, heard the commotion. He walked over, his hands held out in a peaceful, professional manner. His smile was tight. Everything all right over here, folks? More coffee for the table? The birthday man looked up at him. Hey, boss. Just saying, it's a crime to have an instrument like that and not use it. Don't you have anyone who can play? A little dinner music? I'd settle for chopsticks at this point. He laughed again, and some of his friends joined in. David's smile stayed fixed. He'd heard this before. It's a decorative piece, sir. Part of the ambience. From the original building. We don't have a scheduled pianist. Decorative, the man repeated, nodding slowly as if the word was stupid. Right, so it's a very expensive table. Got it. He didn't say it quietly. The people at the next table were definitely listening now. Their conversation stalled. David gave a small shrug, an apology without actually apologizing. Can I bring you all another round of our dessert sampler? He was trying to steer the conversation back to the menu, back to something he could control. The man waved a dismissive hand. Yeah, sure. Why not? As David retreated, the man shook his head, loud enough for people to hear. Just a waste. A total waste. The words hung in the air. They weren't just about the piano anymore. They felt heavy, final. A judgment. In that moment, the piano transformed from a quiet piece of furniture into a symbol of something neglected, something whose purpose was being ignored. A beautiful waste. Elena moved away, her tray heavy. She pushed through the kitchen doors. The heat and noise hit her like a wall. The college kid was there, waiting for an order. He saw her face. What's with the grumpy table? He asked, leaning against the counter. The birthday guy. He's going on about the piano, she said, her voice flat, calling it a waste. The kid rolled his eyes. Drunk people. They love to have opinions. He picked up his plates and headed out. But for Elena, it stuck. The word waste echoed in her head as she scraped food into the trash. It mixed with the older, sadder feeling she carried about her own past, about the upright piano sold away, about the music books packed into a box in her parents' attic. That had felt like a waste, too. A quiet, personal one that no one ever talked about. She went back out into the dining room. The party was laughing again. The moment seemingly passed. But every time she passed the piano now, it felt different. It looked lonely. It looked challenged. The man's mocking voice seemed to linger around it. She was refilling water glasses at a small two-top when it happened again. She heard the man say, clearly, bet you $50 the keys don't even move. Probably glued down. A short, hot wave of anger went through her. It wasn't logical. This man meant nothing, but he was touching something in memory, a feeling that she kept locked away. She caught the eye of the college kid across the room. He was picking up a credit card slip from a table. He glanced at the loud table, then back at her. He raised his eyebrows, a silent question. Asterisk, can you believe this guy? Asterisk, and then something happened. Instead of just shrugging or rolling her eyes back, Elena felt her own gaze sharpen. She looked right at the piano. Then she looked back at her friend. Her face was serious, not annoyed. It was a look that said more than words. He frowned slightly, confused. He tilted his head, his eyes asking again. Asterisk what? Asterisk very slowly, so slowly no customer would notice. Elena shifted her eyes from his face to the piano, and then back to him. This wasn't a look of complaint. It was a look of consideration. A look of a wild, impossible idea being born. His eyes went wide. He understood. He mouthed a single silent word. No. She didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She just held his gaze. The noise of the restaurant faded into a buzz around her. In that moment, it was just the silent piano, the mocking man, and this crazy thought that had broken free from its cage. The kid's expression changed. The disbelief softened into something else. Concern. Curiosity. He gave a tiny, almost invisible shrug. It wasn't a yes. It wasn't permission. It was more like, asterisk, this is insane. But if you're really thinking it, I see you. Asterisk, that was all it took. That tiny acknowledgement the idea, which had been a fragile, fleeting thing, suddenly solidified. It became a plan. A terrifying, exhilarating plan. Her heart started to hammer against her ribs, so hard she was sure the people at the table next to her could hear it. Her palms, dry a moment ago, felt damp. The manager, David, passed by her, checking on a steak. Everything okay, Elena? You look flushed. It's warm, she said quickly, her voice coming out a little strangled. Just a warm night. He nodded, distracted, and moved on. She finished with her tables mechanically, her body on autopilot. Her mind was racing. How would she even ask? David would say no. Of course he would say no. It was a busy Friday night. She was a waitress, not a performer. It was unprofessional. It was ridiculous. But the man's voice was still there. A waste. And the memory of her old teacher's voice was there too. The music isn't in the piano, Elena. It's in you. It waits. For 7 years, she had let it wait. She had told it to be quiet, to be practical, to focus on the trays and the tips and the rent. But now, this loud, rude stranger had pointed at the silent instrument and called it useless. And something deep inside her, something she thought had gone to sleep forever, stirred and stretched. It wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about proving the man wrong for his sake. It was about proving something to herself, that it wasn't all wasted, that the girl who practiced for hours still existed somewhere underneath the apron. She watched David. She waited for a moment when he wasn't with a customer, when he was just standing by the computer, looking over the night's receipts. The kitchen doors had just swung shut. The college kid was taking an order. The birthday party was singing a slurred, off-key rendition of Happy Birthday to someone else. This was her chance. Now or never. She took a deep, shaky breath that did nothing to calm her nerves. She untied her apron, her fingers fumbling with the simple knot. She folded it neatly, a lifetime of habit, and placed it on a low shelf behind the host stand. Without it, she felt exposed. Just a woman in a simple black dress. She walked towards David. Her legs felt like they were made of wood. Each step was an effort. The distance across the dining room felt like a mile. She could feel eyes on her, customers wondering why a waitress was walking without a tray. Without purpose, she reached David. He looked up from the screen, a question on his face. Her mouth was dry. She tried to swallow. When she spoke, her voice was a low whisper, almost a croak. "David," she said, "let me play." David blinked. He looked at her, then past her shoulder at the full dining room, then back at her face. For a second, he seemed to think he'd misheard her over the background noise. "Play?" He repeated, his voice flat with confusion. "The piano," Elena whispered, the words sticking in her throat. She forced herself to continue. "Just for a few minutes. To answer him. Just one song." David's eyes darted toward the birthday table. The man was now telling a loud story, his arms waving. Understanding slowly dawned on David's face, followed immediately by pure, professional horror. "Elena, no," he said, his voice low but firm. "Absolutely not. It's the middle of the rush. Look at table 11. They haven't even gotten their appetizers yet. You can't just perform." "I won't let the tables back up," she said quickly, the plea rushing out of her. "I promise. One song. 10 minutes, tops. I'll make up the time. I'll stay late to close. Please." She was shocked by her own boldness. She never asked for favors. She never caused trouble. She was the reliable one. David ran a hand over his face. He was a good manager, fair, but he hated disruption. A silent piano was one thing. A potentially bad, embarrassing performance by a waitress was a disaster he could picture perfectly. The cringing customers, the terrible reviews online, the laughter. Do you even know how? He asked, not to be cruel, but because it was a practical question. He'd never seen her do anything but work. "I did, once, a long time ago," she said. There was no hiding the truth in that. He looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the flush on her cheeks, the unusual brightness in her eyes. It wasn't the look of someone wanting to be the center of attention. It was the look of someone who had to do something, a need so deep it was shaking her. He'd known her for 2 years. She was quiet, steady. This was completely out of character. A crash came from the kitchen, followed by a curse. The sound seemed to decide for him. The night was already chaotic. What was one more unpredictable element? And a part of him, a very small part, buried under spreadsheets and inventory lists, was curious. And maybe a little annoyed at the loud customer himself. "One song," David said, holding up a single finger. His voice was stern. "One. And if I see a single table waiting for a refill or a check, you stop immediately. You get up and you get back to work. Understood? This is not a concert hall." Relief, cold and electric, washed over her. She nodded so fast her ponytail bounced. "Understood. Thank you." She didn't give him time to change his mind. She turned and began the walk across the dining room toward the piano in the corner. This walk felt even longer than the one to David. Now she was completely exposed. She had no tray, no notepad, no reason to be walking through the middle of the room. A few customers glanced up, their expressions mildly puzzled. A woman waiting for her food watched her pass with idle curiosity. The college kid, coming out of the kitchen with a tray of soups, froze when he saw her. His eyes went huge. He'd seen her talk to David, but he hadn't believed she'd actually go through with it. He gave her a look that was half panic, half awe, and quickly scurried to his table, almost spilling the soup. Elena's world narrowed to a tunnel. The sounds of the restaurant, the laughter from the birthday table, the clatter of cutlery became a distant ocean roar in her ears. All she could see was the piano, the polished lid, the fake flowers. The little electric candle's fake, flickering light dot. As she got closer, the old, familiar scent hit her faintly. a smell of wood polish, old felt, and a hint of dust. It was the smell of every piano room she'd ever known. Her throat tightened. She reached the instrument. For a moment, she just stood beside it, her hand resting on its curved side. It felt solid, real. This was really happening. She leaned over and carefully, with both hands, lifted the heavy vase and the candle. They were lighter than she expected. She set them gently on the floor beside the piano leg. Then she faced the lid. The lid that was always closed, always locked. There was a small, simple brass latch. She pressed it. With a soft, precise click, it released. The sound was startlingly loud to her. She took the edge of the lid and lifted. It was heavier than the vase, solid and balanced. It rose on its hinge, and as it did, it revealed the hidden world inside. The keys, a cascade of perfect white and black, stretching from one side to the other. They were clean, slightly ivory with age, waiting silently in their row. The sight of them, so familiar and yet so foreign after all this time, made her breath catch. Her heart was beating so fast, she felt light-headed. She became aware of a new silence spreading around her. Not the entire restaurant, but her immediate vicinity. The tables closest to the piano had stopped talking. They were watching. A man with a fork halfway to his mouth had paused. A couple on a date both turned their heads. The curiosity was turning into expectation. There was no going back now. She pulled out the piano bench. It scraped softly against the wooden floor. She sat down. The feel of the bench beneath her was different from any chair in the restaurant. It was firm, upright. The height was wrong. She adjusted it slightly, her movements stiff. The simple act of settling herself before the keyboard felt like a ritual. She was clumsily remembering. She looked down at her hands where they rested in her lap. Her waitress hands. There was a small, fresh paper cut on one knuckle from a menu edge. A tiny smear of chocolate sauce near her thumb from a dessert plate she'd cleared. These were not a pianist's hands. They were workers' hands. For a dizzying second, she thought, I can't do this. It's been too long. I've forgotten everything. She closed her eyes. She couldn't look at the staring faces. She blocked out the distant noise of the birthday party. She had to find one piece. Just one. Not the showy pieces she'd learned as a teenager to impress. Something simpler. Something true. And then it came to her. Not a piece she'd played for exams or recitals. A piece from a movie she'd loved. One she'd taught herself secretly, just for the joy of it, during a summer when everything felt possible. The notes were clear in her mind, not as written symbols, but as a map her fingers once knew. She opened her eyes. Her vision cleared. The keys were no longer intimidating. They were just a landscape, a path she needed to walk. She lifted her hands from her lap. They trembled, just slightly. She willed them to be still. She stretched her fingers, feeling the joints pop softly. She hovered her hands over the keys, finding the starting position. The shape her hands needed to make felt strange at first, like trying to speak a language she hadn't used in years. She took one last deep breath. This was it. And then she let her fingers fall. The first sound was a single clear note. It was a high note, pure and bright as a drop of water. It hung in the air of the restaurant for a second, alone. At a nearby table, a man's fork, which had been on its way to his mouth, stopped moving. He didn't put it down. He just stopped, suspended. Then came a second note, lower, answering the first. And then a third and a fourth, falling in a simple, gentle pattern. It was a melody that was sad and sweet all at once. It wasn't loud or showy. It was thoughtful. It was the kind of music that asked you to listen, not just hear. It was the opening of a piece called Comptine D'une autre eat from an old French film. Elena had learned it note by note, listening to a scratchy recording over and over until her fingers found their way. She hadn't thought of it in years, but her hands remembered the path. For the first few measures, her playing was careful, precise. She was thinking, her mind whispering the instructions. Asterisk this finger next. Now a stretch, now soft on the pedal dot asterisk. Her back was straight, her shoulders tight with concentration. She was a waitress sitting at a piano, but then something began to change. The muscle memory, buried for so long, woke up. It took over from her thinking brain. Her fingers, which had fumbled with apron strings and steak knives, began to move with a different kind of purpose. They knew this terrain. The simple pattern of notes began to repeat, but faster now. It began to cycle, like a music box that was slowly, beautifully, winding itself up. The left hand joined in, playing a steady, rocking rhythm underneath the right hand's dancing melody. The sound filled the space around the piano, spilling out into the room. The restaurant was transforming Dot at the table closest to her. The couple on their date completely forgot their conversation. The woman rested her chin on her hand, her eyes fixed on Elena's profile. The man slowly put his fork down, his attention fully on the music. The clatter from the kitchen doors seemed to grow quieter. One of the other waitresses, coming out with a tray, stopped just outside the doors and didn't move. She just stood and listened, the tray heavy in her hands. The change was most profound at the birthday table. The loud talking had died first, replaced by confused glances. Then, as the music built and grew more confident, the laughter vanished. The birthday man, his wine glass halfway to his lips, lowered it slowly to the table without a sound. He didn't look smug or amused anymore. He looked stunned. He stared at the woman in the black dress, her back to him, her hands flying over keys he had claimed were probably glued shut. His face went from red to a paler, more thoughtful shade. Elena didn't see any of this. Her world had shrunk to the span of the keyboard and the music in her head. The fear was gone. The stiffness melted from her shoulders. A feeling was rising in her chest, so powerful it was almost painful. It was the feeling of meeting an old, dear friend you thought you'd lost forever. This wasn't just playing notes. This was speaking. This was saying everything she hadn't said in 7 years. The fatigue of double shifts, the loneliness of her small apartment, the quiet grief for a path not taken it, all flowed out through her fingertips. But so did the joy of remembering, the sheer physical joy of making something beautiful. Her body began to move with the music. A slight sway. Her head tilted, following the rise and fall of the phrases. The simple cycling pattern of the piece was now a whirlwind, a beautiful melancholic dance. Her right hand flew up and down the keys, the notes sparkling. Her left hand anchored it all with deep, resonant chords. The song was telling a story without words. A story of Parisian streets in the rain, of small miracles, of loneliness and hope twined together. Everyone in the room could feel it, even if they didn't know the movie or the title. An older woman at a table by the window had tears in her eyes. She wasn't crying from sadness. It was the kind of tears that come when something is unexpectedly, perfectly beautiful. The manager, David, had come out from behind the host stand. He leaned against the wall, his arms crossed. His professional worry was gone, replaced by an open-mouthed look of disbelief. He watched his reliable waitress disappear, and in her place, an artist emerged. He forgot about Table 11's appetizers. In the kitchen doorway, the college kid stood with the chef. The big man, usually frowning, had wiped his hands on a towel and was uncharacteristically quiet. He listened, then gave a single slow nod of respect before turning back to his stove, but more quietly than before. Elena played through the song's middle section, a slightly darker, more thoughtful variation. Her touch was delicate, then strong. She used the pedals to let the notes blend and sing. The piano was no longer a piece of furniture. It was alive. It was an extension of her. Every note rang true. Filling the high ceiling of the bistro. She was nearing the end. The music returned to its opening pattern, but it was fuller now, richer with everything that had come before. It was a return home, but a home seen with new eyes. As she played the final repeating sequence of notes, she let them slow. Just a little. Each one a deliberate, tender step. The sound began to fade, lingering in the air. She played the last 3 notes. High, middle, low. They were soft, clear, final. The last note faded into silence. For a moment, that silence was complete. It was a different kind of silence than before. It wasn't empty. It was full. Full of the music that had just been there. No one moved. No one coughed. The entire restaurant was holding its breath. Elena's hands slowly lowered from the keys and came to rest in her lap. She was breathing deeply, her heart still pounding, but with a steady, strong rhythm now. She stared at the piano's internal workings, the hammers and strings she had brought to life. She felt dizzy, spent, and more awake than she had in years. She had done it. She had actually done it. The girl from the past had met the woman of the present, right here on this bench. And for 3 minutes, they had been the same person. The silence held for 1 second, then 2. It was a thick, respectful silence, the kind that follows something real. Then, from the back of the room, a single person began to clap. It was the older woman by the window, the one with tears in her eyes. Her claps were slow and deliberate, ringing out in the quiet. It was like a signal. Another person joined her. Then another. A man at the table near the kitchen put his hands together. The couple on their date applauded, smiling at each other as they did. It wasn't wild, screaming applause. It was warmer than that. It was a deep, appreciative sound that spread through the dining room like a wave. Table by table, until almost every person in the red brick bistro was clapping. Elena, still sitting on the bench, heard it as if from far away. The sound pulled her back into the room. The tunnel vision faded, and she became aware of the people again, all looking at her, all smiling. A flush of heat rushed to her cheeks, but it wasn't from embarrassment. It was a shock of warmth, of being seen in a way she never was, while carrying a tray. She turned slightly on the bench to face the room. She didn't stand up or bow. That would have felt wrong, too theatrical. Instead, she just gave a small, humble nod, a quick press of her lips together in a shy smile. Her eyes scanned the faces, the nodding couple, the emotional older woman, and then they landed on the birthday table. The loud man was not clapping, but he was looking right at her. All the bluster was gone from his face. He looked thoughtful, even a little chastened. Then, slowly, he did something more meaningful than clapping. He raised his hand and gave her a small, sincere salute, dipping his head slightly. It was an acknowledgement, an apology, a sign of respect. Then he did join the applause, his hands coming together in slow, solid claps. That was the moment Elena knew it hadn't been about him at all. And he knew it. The manager, David, finally moved from his spot by the wall. He was clapping too, a look of pure relief and astonishment on his face. He caught her eye and gave her a firm, approving nod. Okay, that nod said. You were right. The applause began to taper off, dissolving back into the murmur of the restaurant. But the murmur was different now. It was softer, peppered with words like incredible, and who is she? And I had no idea. The spell was breaking. Elena was a waitress again. She had tables. She had a job to do. She stood up from the piano bench. Her legs felt a little shaky, but they held. She carefully closed the heavy lid over the keys, hearing that soft, final click. She picked up the vase and the electric candle from the floor and placed them back on top, exactly as they were. She was putting the decoration back in its place, but as she turned, she knew nothing was exactly as it was. She walked back toward the host stand, where her apron lay folded. The walk this time was different. People didn't glance at her with puzzled curiosity. They smiled at her. A little girl at a table with her parents tugged on her mother's sleeve and whispered, loud enough for Elena to hear, "Mama, I want to play like her." The words hit Elena right in the heart. She gave the little girl a small, quick smile before looking away, her eyes suddenly stinging. She reached the shelf, picked up her apron, and tied it around her waist. The familiar weight and knot brought her fully back into her role. She took a deep breath, smoothed her dress, and picked up a water pitcher. The college kid appeared beside her, his tray empty. He bumped her shoulder lightly with his own, a big grin on his face. "Okay," he whispered. "That was officially the coolest thing I've ever seen. Ever." She couldn't help but smile back, a real, wide smile. "Thanks." "No," he said, his voice serious for once. "Thank you." She got back to work. She refilled the waters at table 3. She brought the long-awaited appetizers to table 11 with an apology for the wait. She cleared the birthday table's dessert plates. The normal rhythm of the night resumed, but the texture of it had changed. When she brought the birthday table their bill, the loud man stopped her. His friends were putting on their jackets, getting ready to leave. "Listen," he said, his voice much quieter than before. He looked up at her, his expression earnest. "That was really something. I was out of line before. I'm sorry." "It's okay," Elena said, meaning it. "No, it's not," he said. He took out his wallet, paid the bill with a generous tip already included, and then placed something else on top of the small tray. It was a $50 bill, folded neatly. He tapped it with his finger. "That's for the concert. Seriously, thank you." Before she could protest, he and his group were heading toward the door. Their night finished. The rest of her shift passed in a kind of pleasant blur. Other customers stopped her, not to order, but to compliment her. "You made our night," one man said. "You have a real gift," another woman told her. David pulled her aside near the end of the night. "Okay," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "New rule. From now on, if it's not too busy, the piano isn't just decoration. You can play. Just let me know first." It wasn't an offer to be a star. It was an offer to be herself, sometimes, in the middle of her work. It was perfect. Finally, the last customer left. The lights were dimmed. The other servers cashed out and left with waves and tired smiles. Elena was alone in the dining room, finishing her closing side work, wiping down the last tables, checking the chairs. She stood for a moment in the quiet, empty space. The only light came from the soft glow over the bar and the little electric candle flickering on top of the piano. She walked over to it. She didn't lift the lid or play a note. She just rested her hand on the polished wood, feeling its solid presence. It wasn't a silent challenge anymore. It was a companion, a possibility. She thought about the little girl who wanted to play like her. She thought about the years she had considered lost. They weren't lost. They were just dormant. The music hadn't abandoned her. It had been patient, waiting for the right key, the right moment, the right silent instrument to speak through. She wasn't going to quit her job. She wasn't going to run off to become a concert pianist. That was a fairy tale, and her life was real. But her real life had just gotten bigger. It had room for both the apron and the music. The waitress and the player were the same person, and she finally understood that. She turned off the electric candle, plunging the piano top into shadow. She grabbed her jacket from the back, turned off the main dining room lights, and stepped out into the cool night air. The city sounds greeted her: distant traffic, a siren, the buzz of a streetlight. They were the usual sounds. But as she walked to the bus stop, she hummed softly to herself. It was a few bars of the song she had played. The melody felt like hers again. A secret she didn't have to keep anymore. She hadn't just played for an audience. She had played for the person she used to be, and for the person she still was. And in doing so, she had reminded everyone who heard her of a simple, beautiful truth. Passion doesn't make a sound until you find the courage to give it a voice. And sometimes, that voice can be found in the most unexpected places, even in the quiet hands of a waitress on a busy Friday night.